And sometimes, though, the thing that we think we want and that we think is good for us is actually not the thing that our nervous system needs, right?
When it comes to self-development and integration, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. Welcome back to the Vital Point podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. On this podcast, you will learn simple methods to transform your life and hear the stories of practitioners who are out in the world doing that work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. I am still in shock and awe that we are on episode 99, so close to 100, and such an amazing episode that I have for you today. The return of my friend, Connie Biesalski. This is the third time that Connie's been on the podcast. She was actually the third guest ever on the podcast, which is super cool. And I thought this is a perfect way to lead into episode 100. Connie and I met doing the neurodynamic breathwork facilitator training in 2020. I've been proud to call her a friend and somebody that I look up to ever since. And, you know, she has been really influential to me. And I talk a little bit about that in the podcast. But, when I was thinking about starting a podcast, she was doing a podcast with another trainee that I was actually partnered with for a while during the Breathwork program. And their podcast really inspired me. It helped me to just have the courage to just say, screw it, I'm going to start doing this too. Connie is an incredible breathwork facilitator. She's also a nervous system coach. We're both going through the Somatic Experiencing training, and that's one of the topics that we get into during this conversation. Besides for that, talking about a grounded approach to breathwork and our experience so far with somatic experiencing, how that's changing our personal practices, as well as the way that we are facilitating and coaching. And really going deeper into the benefits of somatic work beyond healing trauma, just the way that it changes how you experience life and coming into a higher definition of living. Before we jump into the episode, I want to just say thank you for being here. If you're new to the show, please make sure you're following on whatever platform you like to consume your podcasts on. Leave a review or a rating if you can. That would definitely help. And make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss all the great stuff that's coming up. Now, without further ado, enjoy this conversation with Connie Biesalski. Connie Biesalski, welcome back to the Vital Point podcast.
Jonathan Schechter, I am super stoked to be back. Thanks for having me.
It's you're the second person that's been a 3-time guest, so I'm really, really excited.
Ooh, wow. Feeling honored.
Yeah, well, and you were, I think, the second or third guest on the podcast, so
True,
it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, awesome. Also, I was super happy to see how your podcast project is coming along and the guests that you've had on, super, super awesome.
Oh,
congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. It that really feels nice to hear from you. I want to take a moment to receive that and just to share, as I was getting ready this morning, I was thinking about just how much inspiration I draw from you. I feel like I'm always kind of looking up to you, or looking at what you're doing, whether it's your content, the courses that you're putting out, or even just the way that your setup looks right now, and being how can I do more of that? How can I be like that? And it took me back to the way that we met through the neurodynamic breathwork training, and something that was a part of the personal development section with fractal psychology and Sayumi Nakamura, and this idea that when things show up in your reality, And especially as they show up close to you in your reality, it's because those things are available to you as well.
Yes.
And that you have the opportunity to like celebrate that and to celebrate them and to feel happy rather than what used to happen to me. And I'm like, as we're having this lesson, I'm like, oh, this is totally me, of like feeling jealous, feeling like separation, feeling uh almost like sort of being a hater, like, well, how come they're doing so well, how come they have all these things, and
Yeah.
what am I doing? So
Yeah.
it was just this like wonderful little reminder for myself of like,
Mm.
oh yeah, like this is so exciting. I'm really excited just to be talking with you again.
Aw, thank you. That's really wonderful to hear. Thank you. Also taking a moment to receive.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to the idea of, in shadow work, how, when we talk about projection, but also whatever we really find inspiring in someone else and that we admire in someone else is really just, mirroring back to us, just unfulfilled potential that is
Hmm.
somewhere within us that just wants to be, I guess, enlivened into existence or something. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true, right? Like, so you have been sort of this mirror for me of some of these things that I've wanted to do and to step into. And yeah, it's been really great since the last time we've talked, because some of those things have started to actualize in this big way, and
aw,
it's just like, oh wow, like it's so nice to be out of the corporate life and like, yes, like I finally did it. And I'm constantly asking myself, like there's one, it's sort of like the angel devil, sort of conversation on the shoulder. Like there's one voice that's like, man, like why did it take you so long to do this, because it's going so well. And then the other is like, well, but you had a bunch of stuff to work through to get to that
yeah.
point, right, to be able to take that leap of faith. So I'm just grateful that it's working out, and that there's
We
people
all
like
have our own
you.
timeline.
Right,
We just
right.
can't interfere with sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, it's just been great to have, people to look up to in the space, and, role models, and folks like you that are really like blazing the way, right?
Ooh.
Cuz I feel like I'm starting to hear things that I used to say, and I still do say, to people that I look up to, of like, wow, like you're really like you're really inspiring to me, or like you're living the dream that I want, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
cool, that's really nice to hear. And like it's not easy, like it takes some work to be able to find that path, and to be able to get to that place where you're like, oh yeah, I can really just live the life that I want to live, and not
Mm-hmm.
be afraid, not have my nervous system shutting down and contracting around, that security or that safety that I think I need.
Mm-hmm.
um so yeah, it's been a really, really interesting time since the last time we chatted on the podcast.
I don't know, but also looking back to, I mean, how long has it been now since we did the training? I don't know,
Right.
3 years, 4 years? I
Yeah.
don't know. And so, and just seeing how far, we both have come, and
Yeah.
how far you have come. And I'm super proud, man, that, where you are today. And we spoke a little bit about what you're up to these days before we hit record. And so, yeah, super happy to hear all the news and how things are going. So,
Yeah.
even
I
just to,
appreciate
yeah,
that.
compared to when we spoke last for the podcast last November. I mean,
Right.
gosh,
Exactly.
um, yeah.
It's just like this whirlwind, and
Mm.
there's an interesting, I wonder what you think about this, but like I've always sort of looked at um the contrast between like the times in life where you're like really, really goal oriented, and really like you have these very defined objectives, and then the times where you really just have to let go and just like let life sort of take you in the direction that it's moving in.
Yeah.
And I've always thought of it as like kind of like swimming in a really strong river, and like even when you have an objective, you have to navigate around the current and work with the current. It's not like a straight A to B.
Yeah.
And then there's times where it's almost like just let go, just completely let go and let yourself float and let the current take you and
Totally.
surrender to that experience.
When was the last time that you surrendered to the current?
Oh man, I think right, right around the last time that we talked, like going into this job opportunity was really trusting because it was like, hey, do you want to come do breath work at a residential treatment center? And my first question was like, well, hold on a second. I've just spent the last 2 years marketing myself and trying to create this business for myself as a psychedelic integration coach. And I also do, neurodynamic breath work. I don't think I can do either of those in a residential treatment center. So is this the right decision? Is this the right place for me? And then it was like, this is too good of an opportunity to pass up. So I think walking into that situation was like, okay, I'm just going to trust and be very curious and try to learn, and now looking at it today, it's like I have 7 different groups that I've developed as sort of a product. Like there's times where I'm like, I, I could literally, and I have done it, like done this as a workshop or a class
Mhm.
outside of this environment. And those are all things that, I were a combination of walking into the situation and really like being curious about, well, what do people need here? Because I can't do neurodynamic breath work with them. I mean, I could, but it just wouldn't feel right ethically or responsibly for me, right? And even walking in and there was somebody there that was doing Wim Hof breath work, right? And like the first thing I hear from the clinical director and some of the other uh therapists is like, well, a lot of people get triggered in this group, you know and
No
i'm like
shit.
i'm like really, you don't say,
Yeah.
and especially the women, especially when there's women and men mixed together, it can really trigger, especially if there's like been sexual trauma. And I'm like,
Mm,
uh-huh, yeah, like, so what can I do to not perpetuate that, to not like continue it? Because I don't want to come in and just be like, here's your triggering situation for the next, 45 minutes. Like that doesn't seem right. So, I mean, honestly, I took a few pages from the work that we did together, and the
mhm,
things that you've shared with me about like, yeah, like activating breath work can be great, but what are you doing around that to help regulate your nervous system? So like even within that group that I run a couple of times a week, it's like we spend the first third of it doing coherence breathing, somatic awareness, like resourcing yourself in the body. Like let's just get into the body and like into the nervous system before we start to blast off,
yes, yes.
And then even within that experience, like I feel like it's very, very titrated. It's like, let's do like 30 circular breaths and a minute hold. And like we're not pushing it. If you feel like you need to breathe in that minute, please do so. And I really try to be very transparent as far as this can be activating, this can be triggering, this can bring up stuff. Everybody's nervous system is different, and you have to be aware of that, and you have to listen to yourself. And
Mm,
yes, there's this wonderful opportunity to expand and build that capacity. um, you might feel triggered once and be able to sit with that and observe it and like not go into a shutdown mode, but also be aware if it continues to build, if it continues to get more overwhelming, and here's how you would bring yourself back down and kind of into a more regulated state. And even within that, I've had people go into dissociation. I've had people get up and leave and just be like, nope, this is not
mhm,
happening today. And then there's other people that have like really opened to the experience and had very, very profound shifts in a really short period of time. Like where, I was even questioning it in the beginning, was like, well, can people go into an expanded state in this short of, like short a time window? And the answer is a very resounding yes,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Doesn't take much of
Right.
activating breathwork to expand. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Hmm.
And then it was like
Hmm.
all the other stuff that has been, kind of coming behind it about that I've been learning and that has been really crucial to my own journey in the last couple of years as far as nervous system regulation and somatic experiencing and, a more grounded mindfulness experience, like I wonder what it would be like to keep your eyes open during mindfulness so you're not just like floating away and dissociating in a very subtle way,
Hmm.
um and just working with people that I think my my initial thought, I think first day I was there, was like, wow, what am I going to do? Because I would screen most of these people out of my private practice. I definitely wouldn't throw them in a neurodynamic session. So what am I going to do? And I've been answering that question for the last year.
Hmm. One way that you answered it, and one way that I also answered a similar question is with somatic experiencing and the training
Yeah.
that we both signed up for.
Yeah.
And hmm,
Yeah. So what's that experience been like for you so far?
it's been pretty amazing actually, and I'm really happy I signed up for it. It's probably one of the best decisions, alongside breathwork trainings and each and
Mm-hmm.
every course and training that I did in breathwork. This one's really, oof. I mean, it's changing the way I work, the way I approach coaching, the way that I approach working with clients, but also the way that I use breathwork, and in so many ways. And so, I think this is something that one of the reasons why we decided to meet up today and hang
Right.
out and talk a bit about the training, about the somatic approach, about how it's impacting our work, and also because somatic experiencing as a modality is quite they they know pretty well like what they're doing and where their limits are and their boundaries are, and they're not very fond of breath work, for example, or
Right.
changing your breath in any capacity.
Right.
Breath awareness maybe.
Mm-hmm.
um, However, I've come to realize that actually the two worlds are just an amazing combination. And it's actually really sad that somatic experiencing as an organization or a training is very closed off to breathwork, which doesn't keep me from combining them in my work. And I know there's many other breathworkers out there that teach breathwork and also somatic experiencing. Um, so yeah, that's kind of been in a nutshell my experience so far. But how about you?
Yeah. Were you doing somatic experiencing before you started the training?
So I've done a lot of personal therapy over the years, and
Right.
I started working with a therapist in 2015, I think it was. And I didn't know this at the time. I found out later on that she was actually doing the somatic experiencing training um, as she was working with me, sort of. And she finished up the training during our time together, and I worked with her for several years. And I didn't know anything about somatics at the time. Looking back, I know exactly what she was doing.
Right. You're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, hold on a sec.
Yeah.
But um, but at the time, I didn't know what she was doing. I just signed up for psychotherapy,
Right.
and I worked with her for about probably about 5 years or so.
Mm.
And it was, I mean, I had worked with other therapists before, and our time together was really extremely life changing and transformative. And then afterwards, I started working with a NARM and somatic experiencing therapist.
Mm.
I just kind of got to an end with this first one that I was working with, I just naturally, it just felt like this chapter was closing after 5 years. And then through my partner, who was working with a NARM and SE therapist, I also then started working with her. And we did a few couples therapy sessions with her, actually, at the beginning of our relationship, which was amazing. And NARM, for those not familiar with it, it's also a somatic psychotherapy approach, mainly focusing on developmental trauma, attachment trauma, complex PTSD. Whereas somatic experiencing, I would say probably 80% of it is mainly more trauma, like shock trauma, um, birth trauma, medical trauma. I mean, there's so many different kinds of traumas, but and maybe to an extent, it's also it also deals with developmental trauma. I think they're expanding that. I feel like the goal. I don't know. I don't think it's official or anything, but I have a feeling it feels like somatic experiencing is expanding its scope of trauma. Um, and so yeah, and then currently, as part of the training, I started working with an SE therapist, because we have to do our personal sessions alongside the training, so I couldn't actually get any credit for any of the
I know, right?
SE sessions I've done before, the hundreds of sessions.
Yeah.
But
I
it's
had the
good,
same.
like,
Yeah.
gotta keep doing the work. And currently I'm working with a somatic experiencing therapist, who's really amazing. And it's been really awesome to work with her, because I recently fractured my wrist and I had surgery, and just working through that, for example, was awesome. To have
Mm.
someone guide
Hmm.
me through that experience in
Yeah.
a therapy session, uh, in a somatic way, to really, and I thought I'd moved through that experience, and I felt all the feel, like all the emotions and anything that needed to process,
Hmm.
until I had that session with her. And then afterwards, I was like, whoa, okay, got it. You know,
Yeah.
any surgery, I would say, in any capacity, is probably trauma in one way or another.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's been a long journey, me and somatic experiencing unconsciously for a while. And I think, even besides the idea that it is a trauma healing modality, I think it's a modality that enhances my life in so many ways. Just from all the things that we're learning, all the practices that we're doing, all the exercises, all the different somatic practices that we engage in, and that we learn to work with. But just the lens, I guess, that you experience life with as you're going through the training, and it's just been life changing, ever
Yeah.
since I started the training in February. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I was asking because it's been interesting, in the in person to be working alongside with people that maybe their first experience
Mm-hmm.
with the somatic experiencing modality. And sometimes like the aha moments that they're having, or the getting triggered and then like kind of working through that
Mm-hmm.
nervous system activation. And then there's the folks like you and me that are like, we're having our own version of that, and we're like, oh yeah, like this is,
Yeah.
I do this with my therapist. Or like you start, like you said, you start to see like, oh wait a minute, that's what they were doing. And it's completely transformed my personal sessions as well.
Mm.
Like I feel like I've taken more of an active role in my personal sessions, as opposed to like going to somebody and just being like, okay, you're the therapist, like
Yeah,
help me, right?
I agree. Mm.
So it's like I will start orienting on my own. I've started to that's been like a really big shift since the second part of the beginning training, because like you said, there's three modules in the beginning year. Is not only pausing and sort of doing so just for the audience, one of the main sort of foundations of somatic experiencing is this practice of orientation, of orienting, where you're just pausing and like noticing what's happening in the external environment. And I loved what the, my instructor said about that when he was first explaining it. He said, everybody wants insight, but before you have insight, you have to get outside. You have to feel safe in the environment that you're in before you can actually go within and start to work on the trauma that is inside the body. Um, so, uh, you know, it was like, okay, starting to notice that, starting to do that orienting more. And at first it was like, well, when the trauma was coming up, when I could feel the activation in my body. But then after, there's something that happened after the second training was like, I started to notice where the activation was coming, um, not in like an unsafe or like sort of a trauma way, but even like maybe I'm working on something that feels really overwhelmingly beautiful. A moment where I might go into this like beautiful sort of catharsis and like
Mm-hmm.
start to just, cry and like just be overwhelmed by like what I would consider really positive emotions. And instead of going into that, pausing there and reorienting and just
Mm.
noticing like how that started to shift my experience,
Mm-hmm.
and like being able to receive more. Like maybe some, like, here's a great example. Like somebody might pay me a compliment, like say something really nice, and I feel like that sort of welling up right in my chest, and like I feel really good. And um maybe I start to get emotional about it, and where before I would just like really like dive into that emotion. And now it's like, okay, let me feel it, let me receive it, and then let me orient and come back to it and see, do I still want to cry? Do I still want to like explore this? Or am I feeling a little bit more balanced,
So good.
And
Yeah.
it's actually, I feel like it's helping me um be a lot more grounded
Mm-hmm.
in my trauma work,
Yeah.
where I
Same.
can hold and have more capacity to like not only work on some really big things, but also like hold some more subtle things in a different way and
Mm.
experience them in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really
Yeah,
like
I
it's
agree.
really been shifting the experience a lot. And then yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just being able to like notice some of the things that my therapist is doing, like some of the interventions, or like, it's like what's this there's like a saying, you get to see how the sausage is made, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And like the words they use, the phrases, the
Right,
questions,
right, yeah. So yeah, it's become
um,
more of like this co-creation.
yeah.
And what's funny is like, my therapist has said several times during the last few months, especially as I've started to have these shifts and these revelations of like, well, wait a minute, I'm not like, the catharsis isn't the point. Because I really thought in the beginning of working with her that that was the point, that having these big cathartic releases was the healing, right? And now I'm like, well, wait a minute, it is sometimes, but not always,
Yes.
right? And so
Yes.
like that's where that big shift has happened. And there was a point in time where I started to get really angry. And I like, luckily we have a good relationship, and I literally brought it up during a session, was like, how come you didn't tell me that this wasn't what we were supposed to be doing? Like,
Mm.
why have you been letting me have these big cathartic releases? Why weren't you stopping that? Because I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was the point. I would leave those sessions being like, yes, I did such good work today. I filled the, I put all the tissues in the waste bin,
Fill the
right?
cup
Like
with
I filled
tears.
it,
Awesome.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And hold on, now I'm learning this isn't really
Yeah.
the whole point. And actually, I'm getting more out of not having that catharsis, of being
Mm-hmm.
able to pause and reorient and then come back into myself. And so yeah, we had this whole discussion where I got really upset for a while and was like, how come you haven't been stopping? And she's like, well, this is a journey we've been on together. you know. And she also pointed something out to me that I thought was really important, and it's and still kind of unpacking it, which was like, you know, you, Jonathan, have this big, wonderful nervous system, and you experience things in a very powerful way. Like you're really connected to your nervous system, to your inner experience. That's not a bad thing.
Mm.
You having these big, overwhelming moments, whether it's negative or positive, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just how you're wired. And not everybody's wired like that. And like, so, you know, it's not only like the negative things, the trauma or the challenging experiences, it's being able to like experience beauty in the world. And
Mm.
like, you know, like a hawk going across the sky, and like, or, you know, like just these beautiful moments in nature, or, you know, seeing and experience these synchronicities that will
Yes.
come up in life, and being able to like stop and appreciate them and really feel them. It made me feel like I made more sense, you know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it kind of what comes up for me is as you share this is, it's almost as though through becoming more aware of our own internal world, right? It's almost as though we're expanding our awareness into high definition. We were at
Yeah.
like maybe, I don't know, 720p is what it says here in my window. Um, low definition to high definition and 4K, right? I'm upgrading my whole
Mm.
human experience, my somatic experience. And that, as you were saying, even just, this morning I went out and walked my dog and went out to the beach, and I really didn't want to go. It was windy and stuff, so we went anyway. And then we were down at the beach, and she was having a blast, and just standing there was no one else there, and just standing there and being able to fully take in what I'm somatically experiencing right now,
Yeah.
and in a way that is so much more profound and grounded. I mean, even just 5 years ago, that would have just not been possible for me.
Right.
I didn't have that high definition awareness, interoceptive awareness back then. And it really had to be built. It really had to be developed over a very long period of time. And even though I had already done several years of somatic therapy, I just wasn't there yet. And I think what you were also saying is that for me, that the part of psychoeducation was actually huge,
Oh yeah.
because I was doing a lot of SE therapy without knowing I was doing SE therapy, without knowing much about the nervous system, or without knowing much about trauma and the stress response and the trauma response. And I really feel like there's something to be said about, yes, learning the skills and learning experientially in combination with psychoeducation, nervous system education, trauma education. I don't know, something happened for me, an understanding, not just up here intellectually, but also somatically by learning about it, right? And
Yeah.
reading the books and doing courses and trainings and whatnot. And so I think that is, and it seems like, as looking at social media, that people are getting a lot out of that as well, learning about the nervous system and trauma. And at the same time, though, got to be careful not to get stuck
Right.
in, just learning about things and reading things and intellectualizing our somatic experiencing by reading about somatics,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. I see that a lot at work, you know, in terms of the maybe the psychoeducation group that I have. You know, I have one group where it's just, let's just talk about regulating your nervous system for an hour and like what that means. And one of the main points that I try to drive home, and it's really neat to see the light bulb go on as people are kind of contemplating it and getting it, is again coming back to this idea that they make sense, and the situation that they're in makes sense, and that the things that have brought them to this place of dysfunction, of like sort of surrender and saying, I need to go into this treatment center because I can't manage myself and my behavior, that makes sense from the perspective of their nervous system trying to protect them from them trying to self-soothe in any way that they can, and that there's a good reason that these things are happening, right? um and it's just such a, I think, such a gift to watch that occurring. Or like, there was a guy I was working with last week, and we did the orientation, and I said, well, what did you notice? And he said, well, you know, uh, I spent 20 years as a law enforcement officer, so I'm looking at all the corners. I'm looking at, like, basically like his training took over. And we sat there and we talked about, like, look at what a wonderful thing your nervous system has done for you. You have these self-protective mechanisms that are working so well, right? That you've learned how to really, cue into these areas where there might be danger and protect yourself from it. And,
Wow. Yeah.
yes, you had to do that, right? And, now what are we doing here in this moment, right? Because let's face it, you've also trained yourself out of some of those protective mechanisms, right? You can't run away from danger in your job. It's not available to you, so just having those like little aha moments,
Mm.
and just them, just saying, like, hey, you make sense. And what that's done for me, and what I try to pass on to the people I'm working with, is, for me, it's that whole idea of, let's, for instance, the alcohol isn't the problem. The alcohol is what you're trying to solve the problem with. And you make sense. It takes away a lot of the shame and guilt and
Yes.
internal experience that is not contributing to moving forward
Yes.
or an embodied solution.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. That's a really important point, because that also my own experience and also working with people. That's huge because when for years we might have been thinking that we are the problem, something is wrong with us, and I definitely thought that for many years because I did a lot of things to try and heal myself and the issues that I was dealing with. And yeah, totally shamed myself for just not, I don't know, something's wrong with me. And so, but by learning about a lot of these things, understanding that, hey, wow, okay, this is actually a very natural response to the circumstances that I'm in, or to, considering all the experiences that I've had in my life and in my childhood and during birth. This is what my body is doing, what my mind, my psyche is doing, what my nervous system is doing is completely normal. And that in itself helped me to really access a level of self-compassion. That in itself was really healing and really important on my journey. Yeah,
Mm.
totally.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And the other thing that came up, as as you were talking, was like, um the the beauty of seeing things from the SE lens, as far as being able to slow down,
Mm.
and that
So hard.
I know, but so, like, so helpful. I mean, even like
Oh,
within the training, some of the exercises that we did during the last module, and I'm looking at it very skeptically, like, we're doing this much, like, we're doing 1%.
yeah.
What is this going to do? Like, how is this going to have a shift? And then really feeling the shift from that 1% and being like, whoa, holy
Yeah.
crap. And then, I'm working with all these people that are like, I'm here in this treatment center for 30 days. I know I have trauma. Let's get into it. Like, let's go. Like, why aren't we doing more? And some of them are really angry, and I get that. And it's like sitting there and trying to talk with them and say, like, hey, I totally understand. You're here now. You want to take care of all this stuff. And slowing down and taking it, like, much, much slower is actually going to do a lot more for you than trying to dive into the middle of what, Peter Levine would call the trauma vortex, and getting overwhelmed and shutting down again,
Yeah.
you know?
But it's so hard to do when when like I can totally relate also to these people because I was there for so long myself. I needed quick
Yeah.
fixes.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do this. I'm done with
Yeah.
this. and so and so when our nervous system is used to a lot of this excitation and activation, right? And then suddenly you have a therapist or a coach that's trying to slow you down and slow the
Right.
process down, right? Like that's scary also. That might not feel safe for our nervous system.
Yeah.
And for me, certainly it didn't. Back then, I remember in some of the sessions with my therapist, I would get mad at her for slowing me down so much,
Mm.
and for interrupting me, telling my story. I just wanted to tell the story, and,
Yeah.
and then I would get 3, 4, 5 sentences into it with the story of what was happening, and then she would interrupt me and ask me, "So how does that feel in your body?" And and then
Right.
that would really piss me off. And so I can totally relate, and I think slowing down can be a scary thing for so many of us that are not used to slowing down, because life has not been a slowing down kind of life. And I think it's, for me, actually, looking back, it's been a very advanced phase on my
Mm.
journey to
Mm-hmm.
enjoy the slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why also, and we spoke about this before we hit record. I got into breathwork via holotropic style breathwork, via the cathartic breathwork, hyperventilating, and it was awesome. It was epic. It was just what I needed at the time, and I wouldn't change a thing about my
Right.
experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you'd come up to me at that point in time and told me to do 20 minutes of coherence breathing every day, or do orienting, every day,
Right.
I would have just shown you the finger and not be interested. And
Yeah.
so I needed that. That's where I needed to be picked up on my journey. I needed that. I needed holotropic. I needed catharsis, and it was amazing because, and that's why I think it really depends as to which entry point is best for who, when it
Mm.
comes to trauma healing and whatnot. Because for me, it was via cathartic experiences, because I had suppressed so much in my life, so many, just I didn't know how to deal with emotions, and so I needed the holotropic breathwork to, for me to allow myself to go there, to allow myself to fully feel and to express myself and to cry it all out and to scream it all out. Like, I needed that. And eventually I got pulled towards the more regulating breathwork practices, and
Right.
to, somatic awareness practices and interoceptive practices and somatic experiencing and whatnot. And now I feel like I'm creating a beautiful balance within myself and in my own practice, but also in my work with my clients. And I think it's always a bit of a it's not always easy, I find, as a practitioner. And I'm also guessing, as we progress with the somatic experiencing training and with experience working with people with that modality, things will get easier and clearer earlier on. But like, whenever you start working with a client, there's always that question: okay, what's the best way to to enter their world, and to help them on their healing journey? Is it via the more titrated approach, right? The more regulating stuff? Is that what they need right now? Or is it maybe the more cathartic approach, right? Maybe a more transformational style breathwork session or neurodynamic session. Um, Maybe it's a bit of both. Maybe we can go the more cathartic route and maybe titrate that as well. Like, there's so
Mm.
many different ways, I find, to combine the two worlds, and it's not just black and white. I find there's so many shades of gray that we can explore within ourselves and with our clients. And that's why I find the two approaches really amazing to combine and to work with, and to yeah, with every new client you're like, all right, let's see, what are we gonna cook up here. We have this huge bag of techniques and practices and whatnot that we can potentially use with that person. And then it's a question of, okay, Where is their nervous system now? Where has it been? If I'm going to introduce an orienting practice, is this something they're going to roll their eyes with, or
Right.
are they going to be okay doing it? And so that's kind of been my journey, especially this year.
Yeah, and it's funny because you answered a question that was like coming up as you were talking. It was like, well, how do you determine, that for each client? Because like you said, it is different for everyone. And myself, like you, I had a very similar trajectory of like entering into breath work through the cathartic experiences, through those really expanded state holotropic experiences, and then I mean, I remember during the training, the folks like you and like Johnny Miller that were like talking about like, well, actually there's a bigger world out here than just the catharsis. Like I remember like rolling my eyes and kind of being like, what are these people on, like what's the matter with them? Like maybe they're scared of like the deep end of the holotropic,
Right,
and like feeling like I knew everything, and then kind of coming out into this bigger world of breath work. And somewhere along the line, for me, part of it was, experiencing that shock trauma. Part of it was working with Johnny as a partner during the neurodynamic training. And I remember facilitating one of the practice sessions for him. And I'm watching him on the camera and I'm like, is he even doing the breathing? Like, because here I'm just sitting there and just like huffing and puffing and just like going for it, like, 90 miles an hour. And I'm like, is he even doing the breathing? And then, talking with him afterwards, and I'm like, hey, so what was that like for you? Seemed like you were pretty relaxed. And he was like, no, I went really, really deep, but I've just learned over time, you don't have to be going as fast as you can. And that, like, I remember that first moment where I was like, okay, well, now I'm curious. What would happen if I slowed down?
Hmm.
And then working with you and like starting to incorporate coherence breathing, and the, more buteyko breathing into my daily practices. And all of a sudden being like, oh, there's a whole different world out here. And
Yeah.
then almost having that course correction of like, well, hold on. I know you're talking with clients. I know you want to go into the holotropic states, but what about having some somatic awareness? What about being able to regulate your nervous system? And I love it when there's clients that are like, I'm open. I want to learn the whole spectrum. But I also totally get it when, oh, yeah, we can do that too. And you might actually get more out of those cathartic experiences if you are more grounded, if you do
Yes.
have a more regulated nervous system or a way to regulate through your breath.
Totally. Absolutely. I totally agree. But and sometimes though, the thing that we think we want and that we think is good for us is actually not the thing that our nervous system needs, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, for example, a lot of the type A people, going out doing all the CrossFit and doing all the Wim Hof and all the holotropic breath work. But actually,
Hmm.
what they would need is maybe a bit more regulating breath work, a bit more potato, a bit more light breathing,
Yeah.
bit more orienting, bit more interoceptive awareness, and that's usually really hard for these people. And it was for me too. So I was
Right.
definitely in that category.
Fu-
um,
Funny
yeah.
story. Like a year ago, I helped facilitate a retreat, and I took everybody in the retreat through a conscious ice bath.
Mm.
And my whole idea with it was, let's not dissociate. Let's be very mindful. Let's be very present, and let's use it as sort of a practice for psychedelic experience. Because let me tell you something, you take enough psychedelics, you're going to get into a situation where you are uncomfortable, where you have to sit and surrender and be with that uncomfortable experience. You can't get out of the ice bath, of the psychedelic experience, right? So how can
Yeah.
we bring this mindful, grounded approach to this ice bath? And that's what I thought I was doing. Like a month ago, I was in my ice bath, and all of a sudden I realized that I was dissociating. Like
Mm.
I literally felt my nervous system sliding out somewhere else. And it stopped me. I was like, whoa, what is happening here? Like, this is the complete antithesis of everything that I'm about as a practitioner of cold exposure.
Mhm.
And it really made me pause and kind of re-examine what I was doing. But it also, again, kind of to come back to what we've been talking about, it's like maybe having more awareness of where my nervous system is at on a minute to minute basis, rather than, having these big swings of, going from catharsis to dissociation to, okay, I'm grounded and present for a couple minutes. It's like, oh, cool. Like, this is really interesting. I'm subtly dissociating here. And I've thought the whole time I've been really like grounded and present, like,
Yeah.
isn't this interesting? Wow, like, what's happening right
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
now?
It's so fascinating and just speaks to the need for most of us out there to really explore our internal world more. It's so fascinating how we've lost this interoceptive awareness, right? This ability to be and stay connected to our internal experience without
Mm,
dissociating. And it's just so normal these days to dissociate. I mean, even just being here right now speaking to you, part of me is dissociating.
right.
Right? I can
Yeah.
feel that a part of me on and off, right? More so when I'm speaking. I don't really feel now that I'm speaking to it, I can feel it, but when I'm not, then I don't feel the lower part of my body very much. Then I'm very much up here, right? My hands,
Mm,
my
mhm.
chest, obviously my face, and then I can also see myself in the video.
Right.
Um, and it's only the upper part of my body, and so and then or when we're scrolling on social media, sometimes I do it intentionally. Sometimes when I don't know. Sometimes when I'm really triggered, I know that I have a few things that I can do to intentionally self-soothe that because they help me dissociate, and then I
Mhm.
also know how to then come back into my body and to then deal with whatever is there. But sometimes it doesn't matter how regulated your nervous system is, and how much trauma healing you've done. Like sometimes it's something that we can access, and I think it can be healthy to an extent if we know what we're doing
Right.
and if we know how to come back and then actually be with and sit with what wants to be felt and sat with. And but yeah, I mean, there's so many, and in many ways, dissociation is not always bad. Like, for example, when we're driving, right? We're not fully aware of everything that's going on within us while we're driving the car, right? Or we're
Yeah.
driving and we're listening to music and we're just kind of thinking about, whatever we're thinking about. We're planning our day. I mean, there's so many moments throughout our days where we're dissociating and where it's just a normal way of living our lives, right? To be fully present with every experience. I mean, that would be amazing. Maybe there's some monks out there who can do it. But then on the other hand, with, when we talk about monks and, people who've meditated for a very long time and are very deep down the Buddhist path and whatnot, but then I'm like, well, how much trauma healing have they done? you know?
Mm,
so,
mhm.
um, and how much can you dissociate with mindfulness practices? I mean, that's also
Right.
also an option, right? There's
Yeah.
like the other day I was on the, is it called Waking Up app by Sam Harris? I think it's called
Oh,
Waking
okay.
Up.
Yeah.
And I just noticed that most of these practices on there are not somatic. They're
Right.
just ways to stay up here, to
Hmm.
keep thinking or try to not think.
Yeah.
And there was maybe a tenth of the practices on that app that so many people love to learn meditation with. They're actually quite dissociative, I found. Didn't
Yeah.
like it and regretted signing up for it. So,
Right. Right. Yeah. There is a very large percentage, I think, of, sort of the beginning mindfulness sort of practice that can be very dissociative, and that's been a big shift for me this year as well. Like kind of along with the SE training is, um, I did a mindfulness meditation teacher training with Dharma Moon and David Nichtern. And in a way,
Cool.
it really encouraged me, like the way that he teaches mindfulness really encouraged me to reevaluate my own meditation practice and almost like kind of reset it in a way. So like I started practicing with my eyes open. I started incorporating orientation into my mindfulness practice. Um, and all of a sudden, just there was something about his approach, and I had this a similar experience, you know, talking with him and his staff as I had in the SE training, saying, sitting there saying, okay, you're explaining this orientation. It really sounds like you're describing mindfulness. And they're like, well, no, hold on a second. There's a big difference. And we got to be really careful there. And then sitting in, this mindfulness teacher training and saying, well, hold on, what you're describing here as mindfulness really sounds like very somatic. Like there's a lot of somatic awareness, and how do you like merge these two worlds? And they're like, well, this is mindfulness and it's taught
Yeah.
by the Buddha, and this, we're really sort of staying on this sort of narrow path for the context of this training. But like you said, I think there is a value to finding your own path and taking
Mm.
the pieces from the different modalities that you've practiced and creating your own kind of version that works with your nervous system, that works to address what you're experiencing. And yeah, for me, it's become much more embodied and much
Yeah.
more somatically aware. And then the funny thing to me is like going back and looking at what mindfulness really is, like by the very sort of, you could call it like orthodox sort of Buddhism, like the things that the Buddha really talked about before there was 2,500 years of translation and passing the teachings down from one teacher to the next, and cultural things and commentaries and everything else. And it's like, it says right there in these like very early teachings about having the mindfulness of your body, having the mindfulness of your feelings, not just having the mindfulness of your thoughts and what's happening in your mind. And so it's like, wait a minute, it was there the whole time. I
Yeah.
wasn't paying attention to it. I was the one dissociating and
Yeah.
like closing my eyes and thinking that I was being mindful when really I was like just letting myself go someplace
Yeah.
else.
Totally. And like this whole idea of trying not to think, like that's what I was doing for many years, as I
Right.
was practicing mindfulness and I was getting deeper into Buddhism. And then eventually, as I dove deeper into the somatic world, I was like, gosh, I wasted so much time focusing on trying not to think and controlling my mind, controlling my thoughts, when really what's so much more helpful is just get into your body and that'll take care of it, you know?
Right.
Which is why the breath, I don't need to tell myself, stop thinking, Connie. I just use my breath. I just use that
Yep.
as a vehicle to calm my mind organically, automatically. I don't have to do anything for it. And actually, ever since I dove deeper and deeper into the somatic world and also somatic experiencing and with the training, my transformational breathwork sessions, my deep dives have been even more amazing than they've ever been. More profound, more just, yeah, I don't know. I can't even explain it. Maybe just more embodied, even. Yeah, probably that's it. Just more embodied. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Talk
mm.
more about that. Like, is there, what's that like for you? Is it more in terms of surrender or more embodiment?
Yeah, definitely more surrender, like more surrender, easier surrender. Whereas before, oh man, even after several years, sometimes I would still struggle to drop into my body during a breathwork session. I would just be stuck in my mind and just thinking, thinking, thinking.
Hmm.
Whereas now, I just focus on certain sensations in my body. Like I'm so attuned to my body now. And especially with the somatic experiencing training, like my HD is like double HD or something, triple.
Mm.
And so I'm yeah, it's so much easier for me to connect to the sensations in my body, and to my breath, and to just be fully present with that. um and and then that in itself takes care of the whole experience, really, right? Because when you're out of your mind and when you're dropping into your body deeper, um then yeah, and then I don't know, it just. And then the other thing is, like, I had this breathwork session last Sunday. I was breathing with our teachers. I was breathing with Michael, and I just I had a session. I can't even put into words, and that obviously is something that happens with breathwork. But I felt like I was, it was quite ecstatic in a way. It was quite cathartic in a way, but it felt really grounded at the same time, you know?
Mm.
But also because I now know how to stay more present in my body when big emotions come up. And so whereas before, years ago now, I would essentially, as big emotions were coming up, I would sort of almost unconsciously try to leave my body and dissociate during a big cathartic experience by, as I was lying there, I would be like, my head would be going backwards, right? Which really disconnects me from my body. Right? And I would be breathing like this. I was overstretching my neck, and I've also learned through my partner, who is trained with transformational breath, um, and so she's been trained in using hands and touch and body work when people are breathing, and so I've been learning a lot from her. I've also learned that overstretching your neck and taking your head back when you're breathing, going through a big experience, is actually a way to dissociate. It's
Mm.
actually to not stay present and grounded in your body during a breathwork experience. And so, learning to stay more present in my body as I'm going through these bigger emotional experiences, that was big. To not, do certain movements or to get lost in movement, because you can go into movement or using your voice during a breathwork session also in a way to dissociate and not actually fully feel. And learning a lot about that, let it be through, yes, also somatic experiencing, but also through just learning from my partner, who's been doing this work for 10, 12 years, has been hugely beneficial to my own experience, and to be able to stay more present to what's happening, and to, yeah, also know when, notice the moment where a cathartic experience is a way for me to dissociate, or when is a cathartic experience for me to just, you know um create more connection to myself and to what I'm experiencing. And then also, the integration process, I'm taking that way more seriously these days than I did at the very beginning, when I started out doing these kinds of sessions, and to really take my time to reflect, to integrate, to be with what came up and what's still there. And I also take a lot of time in the integration phase of a breathwork session to downregulate my nervous system. I do a ton of humming. I probably do about 5 minutes, 7 minutes of just humming at the end of every session, just to normalize my oxygen and CO2 levels again, to just really end the session in a grounded way. Um, yeah, and so in that, it's I feel like I've really upgraded my own sessions and the way that I guide other people and teach. Yeah.
Nice.
Mm.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, the humming sounds really interesting. Um, 'Cause I practice the VU breath from SE, which is having a similar effect. And I've also noticed in this last year, I've started to incorporate this device called the Sensate, which
Mm-hmm.
it does like the vagal stimulation
It's like a
at the end.
vibrating
Right.
device.
Yeah, at the end of sessions, as a way
Nice.
to help like kind of bring things back
Yeah.
down. And it's been working out really well. So yeah,
Yeah, I love
there's
that.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there is really something there to, like we were talking about, not just having this blasting off experience, but really supporting it or bookending it with regulation and embodiment.
Yeah, totally. And I think, I mean, breathwork as a modality, I mean, and I'm talking now in terms of the transformational style breathwork, the activating breathwork. I think it still has a way to go in terms of really making it a trauma sensitive,
Mm,
nervous system informed modality. And a
hmm.
lot of the schools out there, I don't think they're quite there yet. Like, we're trying our best to integrate nervous system regulation and trauma sensitive approaches as much as we can into the way that I work with clients, but also in our teacher training. And so, like, for example, looking at holotropic breath work, even though, like, great modality, so grateful to Stan Groff, so grateful to our teachers that we learned from, like, super duper experienced practitioners, have been doing this for years and years. And holotropic is not very trauma sensitive. you know
Right.
let's be
Right.
honest.
Yeah.
And so I think there's still room for improvement and optimization, and trauma is something that is more and more, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's reaching mainstream. It feels like it anyway. But
Yeah.
then I don't know. I meet people out there, and I'm like, no, I think we're still far away from trauma or trauma awareness becoming mainstream. Um, and so I
Yeah.
think we have to adjust to the times as well. And breathwork as a modality is yeah, also has to evolve, and holotropic is the OG, right? Like, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's the perfect modality. I think we can build on that, and I think what Stan Groff did is, he came up with an amazing modality, amazing practice that helps a lot of people. And now there's so many different modalities in schools out there. I mean, we're sort of came up with our own approach, and that also still keeps developing. But I think combining modalities is the way to go these days, I find, because just, I don't know, being a coach or practitioner and having blinders on and just using this one thing, thinking that that's the ultimate solution to everybody's problem, is just a bit too one dimensional.
Mm.
Mm.
I'm curious, something that just came up as you were speaking in terms of, yes, there is sort of this hybridization and also, sort of forging your own medicine, your own path by combining different modalities. Um, when do you think as a practitioner, like how do you have that discernment of like when it's time to move on or when it's time to change? And you spoke to this earlier in terms of, you felt like you had sort of run your course with the one therapist you were working with, and it was like
Mm.
time to move on to working with somebody else. Like,
Mm.
how do you have that discernment for when it's time to maybe tweak something or make a shift or work with somebody new?
Right. I don't know. For me, it's always very organic. And I think that also comes with heightened somatic awareness, that you feel yourself more. You feel what's a yes, you feel what's a no. And you just have these interoceptive um, yeah, capacities to know how your body responds in certain situations. And you learn to trust yourself more. I think that's the key here, is through somatic awareness, we learn to trust ourselves more, which was something I wasn't able to do 10 years ago. I couldn't tell a yes from a no in my body. And so
Right.
it was a purely rational approach. My mind was, weighing, okay, is it a yes or is it a no? But it wasn't actually my body, or I couldn't trust my body. Even if I felt like it was a yes, I was like, but is it really? um,
Mhm.
so I was constantly second guessing my body's messages. And so, whereas now, these days, And it's been like that for quite some time, but I'm like, no, I trust my body. I trust its messages. And so that's my compass. And when it comes to these sorts of decisions, it's very organic, and my body shows me the way. And so far it's always been very organic. Like I've never had to go out and seek out something new, or it just, okay, now let's say this time with my therapist is coming to an end. I feel it, and then I would have the conversation, and then I wouldn't go out and then look for a new therapist. It's almost like that person would just, I don't know, appear. I mean, there have been times where I was looking for someone, but usually when I'm looking for someone, they don't appear. It's usually when I surrender to it, that somehow someone tells me about someone, or they show up on my radar, 5, 6 times, and then I'm like, huh, that's interesting.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And so, yeah, that's kind of been my process.
I've had a similar process with books this year. You know, like first there was I was on somebody else's podcast, on the Trip Sitting podcast, and he said, the host Cam said, "Have you read this book, The Untethered Soul?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I think you'd really really like this book." And I said, "Okay, great. You know, I'll add it to the list. I have like a huge list, right, of books I need to read." And then literally within like the next month, 6 weeks, like 5 or 6 different people mentioned this book, or it came up, and I'm like, okay, obviously I'm supposed to be reading this book, and it actually happened quite recently with you. Like I always really love in your stories on Instagram, you have some really really cool stuff that you're reading, and I'm always really curious about that. And there was a book that you had posted in your stories, and I was like, I asked you about it, and literally it's a book that I stare at every time I go to my therapist's office. It's like on the end of her bookshelf, sort of facing the where I sit. And
Yeah.
so I've looked at that book, the Kathy Kane Nurturing Resilience
I
book.
got this right here,
Yeah,
actually.
I mean, I've looked at that book like tons of times
And the
and
other
been like,
one.
yes, yes,
It's right. Those two books are right here in front of me.
right,
That's so
yeah.
funny.
So
Yeah.
so it's just so funny because I'm like, here's this book that I keep looking at, and I'm like, yeah, eventually I'll get to it. And
Mm.
then all of a sudden, it's like it pops up too many times, or somebody else mentions it, and I'm like, okay, I got to read this book now.
Yeah.
It's a
Well, you really
sign.
gotta get into Alexander Lowen, though. I feel like, I mean, I think half the book, 3/4 of the book are really worthwhile reading. I kind of stopped here because I feel like, I don't know, I just didn't feel it. But I'm also currently reading Bioenergetics by Alexander Lowen,
Mm,
which is also really, really, really good. And I feel like actually reading those two books and getting into Alexander Lowen's work and Wilhelm Reich's work and the OGs in somatic work, really. It's like, what are we doing today? It's those guys have already done it. Now we're all coming up with like these fancy names and new modalities, but it's all been done. Like this is it.
mhm,
And I think it's almost the same with, as I was speaking of earlier, like holotropic breath work, and how that's evolving, reading Alexander Lowen's work in bioenergetics and things. And as I read it, I'm like, this is 19, Wilhelm Reich, what, 1940s, 1930s. And
mm,
then bioenergetics, I think he wrote the book in the 70s, maybe. So
mhm.
it's been a couple of years. And of course, things have developed since then. And the way how we view the world, and like even things like I don't know, like the Oedipus complex, and Freud's influence was still huge back then, and that plays a big role in his books. And so I just kind of tune all of that stuff out and get all the golden nuggets out that interest me.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, a lot of the things that we talk about on social media or in books that have come out in the last couple of years, it's all, it's been done. Like we're just kind of we think we're reinventing the wheel, but we're not.
Right.
it's
Yeah.
that's what I've been learning.
And I think it's such a great practice to be able to like separate the, what's useful to you
Mm,
versus what doesn't make sense either in your own personal life, or just it doesn't make sense because we've evolved, or like the cultural context is different,
yeah.
and like not just throwing the baby out with the bathwater with that. I've had that several times this year um, with a couple of different Buddhist teachers where like the teachers themselves, I would never follow them. I would never be part of their Sangha,
Mm.
as far as, they've had some personal issues or some ethical issues, but the books they've written are incredible. And the
Yeah.
teachings in the books are
Yeah.
like so great. And I'm like, well, I can still really learn
Yeah.
from, the teachings. I don't want to follow the
I'm not
teacher,
gonna
right?
cancel them fully,
Right,
but
right. And like
yeah.
you said, it's like the just sort of the way that we do things now with social media, right? It's like it sort of has to be polarizing. You have to like make a stand and like put one thing down to like put
Hmm.
one another thing up,
We're all
right? And
experts now.
right. But there's something really beautiful about being able to separate or decouple, to use more of that SE language, um, the lesson from the teacher,
Hmm.
or the different feelings, the sensations in my body from the meaning that's happening between my ears about
Hmm.
those different sensations. And
Hmm.
I think for me it's allowed me to, have a greater capacity for and curiosity for things that maybe I don't 100% agree with.
Yeah.
But I can say, okay, well, what is it here that I do agree with, or what is useful? And then, like
Hmm.
you said, I can leave the rest, you know, kind of behind,
Totally. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. But I still think Alexander Lowen, he needs a revival. Like I feel like he needs to come back into people's consciousness more because his books are epic. And I think especially for breathworkers like us, it's so applicable in so many ways.
What's coming up for you? Anything that we need to talk about?
I am opening up a few spots for my coaching program. And so that's going to be happening in like September, October-ish, probably more in October. For I call it somatic alchemy coaching, but really it's all about nervous system regulation, somatic coaching. Yeah, just doing the deep work for nervous system health, also including breath work and functional breathing, of course. So that's something that I'm excited about to dive into again. And otherwise, just follow me on Instagram. Really, that's usually where the magic happens currently, and you'll find out about all the things. I'm just about to start my deep dive sessions again, my monthly deep dive sessions, and I'll be back teaching live again on Instagram as well at some point, probably end of September. So, yeah, it's all coming back slowly.
Nice. Yeah, and good
Mm.
job just like allowing yourself that time, right? To
Mm.
to recover and
Wasn't
heal.
easy.
No, it never is.
Yeah, but
I
here we
remember having
are.
my shoulder in a sling trying and like
Yeah,
really learning to use my phone in my left hand very well,
yeah,
because
I know.
right
Yeah,
hand, and I'm like, and even before the surgery, like I have to get everything done because I'm not going to have,
yeah,
the computer for a couple months. So yeah,
yeah,
it is really hard to slow down.
yeah. So our bodies show us the way, and I apparently needed the break, and yeah, so it hasn't been all bad.
And it kind of goes to, that everything can be, medicine or poison depending on the
Mm.
dosage and our willingness to kind of embrace what's happening, right?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
you could be sitting here minute to minute, day to day, just really feeling uncomfortable, feeling like upset, and like trying to push your body back into, you know, the work cycle that you're used to, right?
Mm.
Because that's what
Yeah,
feels good to your nervous system. Or you
yeah,
can be like, hold on a second, I'm going to take this time and really explore and be
yeah.
curious about what's here now and what's
Yeah.
happening when I do slow down.
Yeah. Actually, fun fact, just before we wrap up, the day before the accident happened, I went into my calendar, my Google Calendar, and I had scheduled 2 weeks offline. I was just going to take 2 weeks off work, no social media, and just go surfing and skateboarding and, enjoy summer. And I deleted those 2 weeks off my calendar. And then the next day, I kid you not, the
Yeah.
accident happened. So call me crazy, but maybe there's a connection there.
My grandfather, who was German, and I'm sure it sounds better in German, but he would always say, "Man plans and God laughs." You know.
Yeah.
so,
So
so there
kind
you
of feels
go.
like that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
right. Well, Connie, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. I'm so grateful for you taking the time, and pleasure as always. And I'm just, I know we sort of started the conversation with this, but I just want to kind of bring it full circle and say I really appreciate, you and your friendship and your,
Mm.
unofficial and official mentoring in various ways over the past few years. And just really feel grateful to know you and consider you a friend.
Same. Yeah, I love it. So I'm so stoked that I got to be here for the third time already. So
Yeah.
let's keep it going and have more chats and stay connected. Yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate
Yeah.
you.
What an amazing episode. Thanks so much for sticking around till the end. Thank you again to Connie Biesalski. You can check her out at breathworkalchemy.co or on Instagram at breathwork.alchemy. She's got an amazing course. She's always running online breathwork as well as events in Europe. So make sure that you check her out. Also, just thanks for being here. I've given it a lot of thought about what I wanted to talk about on episode 100, and I'm going to share something that I haven't really talked about too much on the podcast before, which is the year that I spent living in Tibet and, kind of the aftermath of that. It's something that I'm still integrating, and I hope that you can tune in for this very special episode that will be coming up. Make sure that you're following so that you don't miss out. Also, make sure that you are on the email list, bluemagicelevate.com. To say thank you for signing up, you'll get a free mini guide to Breathwork for Integration, as well as a 3-week trial membership to our online Breathwork community. So make sure that you sign up at bluemagicelevate.com. Don't forget that regardless of the method that you're using, the vital point is to practice. So keep studying, contemplating, meditating, and most of all, practicing. I will see you next time.